Hello everybody, welcome to the Tribal Council podcast, where on this podcast, Survivor represents our life, and when it's gone, so are we. My name is Ethan Kronk, and I'm joined by my co-host, Connor Boudreau. How are you doing today, Connor?
Doing fantastic and well, my friend, and I'm excited to get into this video talking about the 12th placers of the new era. Do you want to get us started, Ethan?
Yeah, so we'll just go right into it with the 12th placer from Survivor 45, Sifu Alsup. Sifu is a player who immediately doesn't really find himself with too many allies, or I should say with any allies. His going out and searching for the idol and being very obvious about it immediately sort of puts everyone on his tribe off. And well, J Maya is also sort of on the outs on the original Reba tribe. We do see that when most of that Reba tribe does go to Tribal Council after the swap, that it's Sifu who's ultimately the target over J Maya. However, he gets saved by Sean asking the tribe to vote him out. So he's kind of saved in a couple ways, in the sense that, first of all, Reba going to Tribal Council never happens. And then when they sort of kind of do go to Tribal Council, it's with some random guy from the Lulu tribe who asks everyone to vote him out. Because even with that tribe being composed entirely of Reba members plus Sean, Sifu was still going home if Sean hadn't asked everyone to vote him out. So that's pretty bad. And then when the split tribal happens and everyone's aware of Bruce having an idol, Sifu just becomes a safe, easy, nobody has a connection to this guy, nobody needs to keep him around type of vote. So ultimately, he's just the only person on this list who never really makes a single ally, never really survives a pre-merge tribal without somebody quitting, and probably never would have. There's just a lot of things about Sifu's game that unfortunately put him here at the bottom of this list.
Yeah, one thing I will add to that, ironically, there is something that he does actually do in the game that no one else we've talked about yet has done, and that is he actually wins an individual immunity challenge, which, great for him for that. It's part of the reason J Maya goes home before him, but otherwise, there is no circumstance where logically he would have outlasted J Maya or anyone else from his original tribe, just because, again, timing of certain decisions and moves he made were very discomforting for a lot of his tribe, and ultimately he just became a really, really safe vote in a really, really, I guess, unfortunate situation for a tribal, but, you know, that's how the cookie crumbled for Sifu, and ultimately his game was not a good one top to bottom. So our next player, in the number 8 spot, is Josh Wilder, who happened to have some interesting ups and downs. It starts off by him really just not really connecting well within his tribe, and ultimately probably could have been the first boot from it, but manages to get to a point where he ends up in a swap situation. In a interesting twist, is swapped by himself onto a tribe where he is the only person there from his original tribe, but he's given this free idol that can be only used at the first tribal he attends, which is immediately. He uses the idol to kind of get who he wants out, but it only really happens because, again, of an idol play that he was handed. And then he tries to survive another tribal council with one of, I'm going to say, the worst fake idol ever. Yes, I'm looking at your stick, Aussie. This is somehow worse. It literally falls apart in the hands of Jam Jam, and that is an all-time low for fake idol plays. It evidently doesn't work, and he immediately goes home. So, I mean, there was some attempts made, there was some clear social awareness to know that he was not in a great spot, that you can maybe not say necessarily about Sifu. However, other than that, it's a pretty bleak outlook for how Josh's game goes.
Yeah, I mean, just a correction, he doesn't immediately go home. What happens is, with regards to the tribal council that they were supposed to go to, Matthew ends up pulling himself from the game, and so the tribal council is canceled, meaning that Josh does actually make the merge, where he then immediately goes home, because Jam Jam does not want him in the game at all. Jam Jam hates him, and his entire original tribe is like, yeah, well, I mean, we were kind of gonna get rid of him anyway. So at the end of the day, not much better. I mean, he would have gone home in 13th place. Without being given that free idol, he would have gone home in 12th place. Or he might not have gone to tribal council at all if the swap never happened, but if he did, he would have gone home. So, you know, he does survive one tribal council off the merit of just not being the target when Claire goes home. But even Claire is kind of targeted for reasons that don't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. And Josh is still a target at that tribal, with Franny wanting him gone. There just isn't a single tribal council that Josh goes to where he isn't some sort of target. And there are hypothetical tribal councils he could have gone to where he certainly would have gone home. So the fact that he even comes in 12th, is a miracle in its own right. And I can't name a single actual ally that Josh had throughout the game. He thought he had Danny and Heidi, but he didn't, so yikes. That being said, we move on to our number 7 pick from Survivor 41. We have Sydney Segal. Sydney goes home to the Hourglass twist famously, and Sydney's a player who could be ranked even a little bit lower depending on how we wanted to do our rankings, but I want to make it clear here that in regards to postseason stuff or learning about how the edit might have been manipulated to change certain things about the events of the season, with these rankings we really tend to just go with what was shown on the show. And Sydney is an example of how that might affect things, because we learn in the postseason that her original tribe, Luvu, was not actually ever trying to throw a challenge to get rid of Erica. In fact, they were trying to throw the challenge potentially to get rid of Sydney. So Sydney found herself in such danger on her original tribe that people on her tribe were trying to throw challenges to get her out. Now, this doesn't affect her rankings as much, but what does is the fact that even from what we were shown on the show, Erica had Sydney set in her sights. Immediately, she is a target on her original tribe, and that's very clearly exemplified by the fact that when talks need to be made about who could potentially be a backup target if attempting to vote out Evie doesn't work, Deshawn, who was supposedly probably Sydney's closest ally, is completely ready and willing to throw Sydney under the bus. So she does kind of get screwed over by the Hourglass twist, but at the end of the day, she just doesn't, again, like Sifu, like Josh, she just doesn't really have a concrete ally. She has Deshawn and Danny, but they just throw her under the bus at literally the first possible opportunity. So really, how much can we call those people allies for her?
I mean, I'd argue you can't really call them allies at all. It's really hard to say that when, you know, there's 3 people in Alliance and all they do is turn on you. The first significant opportunity that really comes up. And again, given the fact that they were trying to get rid of you by throwing challenges, it really isn't much of an ally, you know. I can't really put that label on it. However, some pluses for Sydney that weren't necessarily the most noticeable is the shot in the dark play. Some people might look at that as oh, well, that vote ended up costing her. But in a revote, she's almost certainly going home anyways, because the people revoting, 2 of those 3 are Evie's best allies. And all people from her original tribe that are more than likely going to try and keep her there anyways. The shot in the dark was at least a chance to save herself and force a situation where she doesn't just go out here. So it does look at least like a solid attempt on her part when reading the room, knowing things are going to go well. So I'll give her that. But if we take that away and we just look at the grand scheme of things, all in all, a pretty bleak game from simply just not having numbers at any given point, and some pretty bad alliance partners that don't really make you a key piece.
Yeah, I'll say, like, as far as labeling Deshawn and Danny as allies, if we're just going based on what we were shown on the show, Deshawn and Danny were trying to throw a challenge to get rid of Erica, who was targeting Sydney. So, but, I mean, that's kind of why what we were shown on the show doesn't make sense, because if they were trying to do that, then why would they go and turn on Sydney so easily at the merge? We later find out why. It's because what was shown on the show is not accurate, but it is what we base these rankings off of. Even then, Sydney just does not rank very high, so. Connor, do you want to get us started off with the next person?
Yes, I can.
All right. For the 6th placement, we have from Survivor 42, Lydia Meredith. And for starters, she does survive the first tribal council, thanks to the merit of not being Daniel, and would more than likely be, the second vote out had it not been for the fact that Daniel's old allies turn on him, and, Daniel having basically allowed her to survive a couple rounds. We get to the point where she makes it to the merge situation, and she becomes the second person to fall to the hourglass twist. But the main difference to me from what Lydia and Sydney for the hourglass twist is, I don't necessarily think that it was necessarily like Lydia's fault in the sense that, all the big targets suddenly come off the board, and it's just her name really left to be easily thrown under the bus. However, better social gameplay, better strategic gameplay, better alliances, more than just having one person in your corner that goes up pretty early, could have saved her down the road. I think that's a big crucial point that we can harp on here for Lydia, is that there isn't really a recovery from this first couple rounds, and I think this is a moment that really showcases how much that would have benefited her game.
Yeah, I mean, mainly her only real ally was High, but that's closer to anything real than what Sydney had. And at the end of the day, you can argue that based on what we were shown on the show, maybe Erica was going to be the target at the merge, if not for the hourglass twist. But Lydia, you can argue there are multiple people who likely would have been targets ahead of her. So, who all end up being immune, and it's a messy situation for Lydia, it's an unlucky situation for Lydia. And I feel like, well, her game goes very similarly in some ways to Sydney's. Aside from surviving a couple of very chaotic tribal councils, at the end of the day, I just think that Lydia gets a little bit more unlucky than Sydney does, and for those reasons, she ends up a little bit higher on the list. So at number 5, we have Saiounia Hughley. Now, Sai is an interesting player because I think her strengths are stronger maybe than some of the people that we have above her. Her weaknesses are maybe weaker than some of the people we have below her. And that's really what puts her right here in the middle of the list, is just high highs and low lows when you look at her gameplay. She actually does not just survive, but really control the first 2 votes of the season with Stephanie and Kevin. But then her game kind of falls apart. I mean, Kevin was supposed to be an ally for her, and he ends up turning on her, to which she promptly sends him home. Good for her, aside from him flipping on her in the first place. But then, at the 3rd tribal council of the season, Mary is the obvious target. Mary plays her shot in the dark, and what happens? Well, Cedric votes for Sai. It ends in a tie between Sai and Justin. There's a revote. Cedric votes for Sai. It ends in a tie between Sai and Justin. And then Cedric has to make the decision as to who between those two goes home. And Cedric, out of nowhere, decides that Justin needs to go home. So, Sai kind of gets put in an unlucky situation with Mary's shot in the dark play, but then she's saved from that unlucky situation by Cedric being kind of insane. Going into the swap, Sai is yet again a target when Mitch, Chrissy, and Bianca all realize that Sai and Cedric aren't exactly tight, but she's saved when Bianca tells Cedric about her lost vote, and Cedric does what Cedric does best and makes a decision that confuses the entire viewing audience in flipping the vote onto Bianca. Again, at the merge, Sai is a target, however, not as big of a target as Charity, clearly, so that's something you can give her some credit for, but when push comes to shove, you get a split tribal. Sai, who's been a target at every single tribal council that she's attended up until this point, which have been most of the tribal councils of the season, her luck sort of runs out, and she does end up going home. So it's just such a weird player in the sense that she has so much more power than maybe almost anybody on this list, but ends up being more of a perennial target than anybody on this list.
Yeah, and it really speaks to just all the ups and downs that Seiya goes through in this game and just how much flow there is between whether she's actually playing well or poorly at the time. Again, she's the most targeted player. She, at that point when she goes out, has received a significant portion of the votes of the season. She has had her name come up at every single tribal. And even after a missed idol play and some shenanigans with a shot in the dark, she does find her way to emerge, which is quite impressive. It speaks to her survivability in the game. But ultimately, that level of survivability, when you just don't have great overall strategic social gameplay from top to bottom, it's going to fall short eventually. And I feel like for Sei, it comes at a pretty, remarkably later time than you'd expect for someone who has such a chaotic start to the game. But at the end of the day, she does have some solid alliances that do help her get to that point, and just seems to have this ability to just play with Cedric in the most unbelievably chaotic fashion possible. For the number 4 spot, we went for Tim Spicer from season 46. And Tim's game is where things really start to get, I would say, better. I'd say this is kind of like the next level up from some of the previous players, where we had a significant amount of alliances that he was a part of, most of which weren't necessarily in his favor, in the sense that he kind of doesn't really rely on them or trust them to try and push his game in a good way, because when he starts trying to flip numbers and votes and tries to take control in a way that favors his strategic ideals, unfortunately he misreads Q, and that's part of what ultimately ends up sending him home, is the fact that he tries to turn on Hunter and Q just decides that he doesn't trust Tim anymore, and that's what ends up getting him sent out. Ultimately, I don't know that the alliances were necessarily like a significant thing for Tim, because he doesn't really ever seem to be on the top of the chain. I would almost argue he's like the low man on the totem pole for basically every alliance he's a part of. And outside of that, there isn't a significant ton I can say you could say for Tim's like physical game. His strategic game wasn't really proven, because when he goes to finally make a strategic move, it ends up backfiring.
Yeah, ultimately I just think that Tim really does not have a great understanding of the game. I think he finds himself in a good situation where he aligns himself with Ben, who has a really good relationship with Charlie, and Charlie has a really good relationship with Maria, and so it's sort of this game of like connections where Tim really has one strong connection that allows him to be in this alliance of 4, and then he gets lucky to go on this journey where Q is just like, alright, these 3 people, we're forming an alliance, we'll each bring one person from our tribe, and he just doesn't, I mean, the 6 was never really all that great of an alliance, and Tim really just, as much as he buys into it, doesn't actually show his loyalty to it at all, when he, first of all, isn't willing to consider getting rid of an original Sega. Even Mariah, he's hesitant to get rid of, and then when it comes down to Ben, who he didn't choose to be part of the 6, he ended up choosing Maria, he's just completely unwilling to vote out Ben, and then instead of trying to throw out a name like Kenzie, who isn't part of the 6, he throws out Hunter, who is supposed to be a founding member of the 6. And it's that mistake that just really screws him over. And Tim, he just kind of confuses me, because I'm confused if he wanted to be part of the 6 or not. I'm confused as to what exactly his game plan was, because if his game plan was just to ride or die with Sega, then that's what he should have done. But that would have been a bad plan to begin with, because that's not what Maria was doing, that's not what Charlie was doing. It just, I don't know. Tim is kind of an enigma to me, and I think it all stems from the fact that, to begin with, he has a very strong alliance with Ben, and that allows him to be part of this majority alliance on Sega, but I don't actually think he has strong connections with Maria in any way, shape, or form, and his connection with Charlie is, I don't know, okay, I guess. So, he is one of the few people on this list to be part of a majority alliance, but it's kind of questionable how he ends up in that alliance to begin with, and he's a little bit too stuck in tribal lines, and it just, the more potentially strategic advancing alliance that he ends up joining doesn't pan out for him at all. But that's what happens. Tim is the first of many victims of the six that we'll be talking about over the next few episodes, to be honest. So, that being said, at number 3, we have from Survivor 47, Tiyana Hallums. Now, Tiyana starts out the game on Tuku Tribe. She sort of forms a bit of a connection with TK and Kyle, but that connection is really soured when TK makes some remarks at an immunity challenge after they lose that frankly piss Tiyana off to the point where she ends up siding with Gabe to vote out TK, but this is really where she sort of puts herself not in the best position on her own tribe, considering Kyle was sort of on the outs as well, but really that alliance of Gabe, Sue, and Carolyn would have been calling the shots. At the very least, though, Tiyana does recognize that her position on her original tribe isn't great and tries to branch out when it comes to the merge. But it's this branching out that really bites her in the ass when somehow, post-merge, Tuku goes to a tribal council. And Connor, do you want to explain how a entire pre-merge tribe ends up going to a tribal council?
Well, you see, after weird circumstances of the new era of Survivor, sometimes we get these weird mergatories, I guess we'll call them, where just circumstances come up, groups are split, and weirdly enough, Tuku just kind of gets essentially sent back after what is a, challenge that could potentially send different groups of people, but at just the luck of the draw, it's essentially just Tuku, and Rachel, who happens to be by herself with an advantage that has been bestowed to her that allows her to just get up and leave. So, all of a sudden, during tribal council, Tiana's like, no, I don't know about Tuku, I'm trying to branch out, and she's trying to prove her loyalties to Rachel, and Rachel says, well, sorry guys, I'm leaving now. And all of a sudden, Tiana's gone. So, unfortunately, really bad timing as well on the attempt to try and make that solid connection with Rachel, but Rachel knows she has to get out of that tribal or she's going home. And when you have an advantage that literally allows you to just walk up to Jeff and just say, yeah, I'm leaving now. All right, she's going to use it. That seems pretty intuitively honest, or obvious to me. So, unfortunately, Tiana's attempts kind of is why she falls short in that specific moment. However, I like the initiative. I think the idea is clever. It's just very poorly timed, unfortunately.
Yeah, technically she doesn't find herself in as good of a position early on as Tim, but I think she shows a little bit more awareness of the game and how to sort of try to move through the game. She does get incredibly unlucky. The fact that, the tribes are supposed to be disbanded, even if you do end up in this weird, group where half the people in the game are going to tribal council, you don't expect it to just be your original tribe. What an insane situation for Tiyana to find herself in. And if the situation had even been slightly different, she could have potentially done something to try to stay. But unfortunately, with her trying to branch out from her original tribe and then being sent back to tribal with her original tribe in just the unluckiest situation ever, she ends up going home. But it's that unlucky situation that sort of puts her a little bit higher than some of these other players.
That being said, we'll jump over to who we have in the number 2 spot, and that is of season 43, Dwight Moore. Dwight actually does have some pretty good positives right off the bat. He does survive through 2 tribals. He does have a pretty solid say in one of those tribals. Although Jesse and Cody do have to play a willing part, he does get his desired target and neck out in that second tribal. And then he finds his way into a merge situation. All of a sudden, James finds knowledge as power advantage, and hell breaks loose. There is a knowledge as power frenzy. Advantages and idols are getting passed all over the place. And as far as everyone knows, certain people might or might not have advantages. But what is known is Jesse's desire to target out some of Noelle's allies. And that is where things go south for Dwight. Dwight not only has possession of an idol at one point that he passes off to, if I'm not mistaken, Jesse himself. So once Jesse and Cody are aware of this fact, that doesn't sound like this is really going to have any pushback, Noelle's allies going to go, that's the move they strike on. And ultimately, Dwight does go out here in what is a pretty unfortunately random set of circumstances He kind of literally just gets picked out because for some reason, instead of just targeting Noelle, we're going to target out one of her allies and keep her in the game.
Yeah.
I don't know. That never made sense to me.
That's a situation that's confusing to me too, is like you're targeting Dwight to weaken Noelle when Noelle herself is fully, like, vulnerable. It just... I mean, I love Jesse. I dare not speak ill of him, but it is kind of a confusing decision to me. Except when you consider the fact that he had just been handed an idol from Dwight, and then you realize, oh, that's probably a little bit more so why Jesse ended up targeting Dwight over targeting Noelle directly. Because then he gets to have an idol that nobody knows about. Not even Cody knows that Dwight has this second idol. I mean, he knows that he has Cody's idol because Cody gave it to him, but Janine's idol, nobody had any reason to think that fucking Jesse, of all people, would have that. So I guess you could say Dwight makes a mistake in giving that idol to Jesse, because maybe if he hadn't done that, Noelle would have been a more direct target. But I understand where he was kind of coming from to try to make it as difficult as possible for the idol to be stolen. Unfortunately, the idol is stolen, not with the knowledge of power, but by a blindside on Dwight at that tribal council. And to be honest, well, Dwight doesn't find himself in a majority alliance per se at any point. He finds himself in a decent position on the original Vessi tribe. So that puts him in a decent standing on this list. And then the fact that, you know, he does form an alliance with Janine, clearly, given she passes her idol off to him. The fact that he does have a very, very tight ally in Noelle. The fact that he's still kind of able to work with Jesse and Cody a little bit. And the fact that he ends up going home due to some very chaotic and confusing circumstances is kind of what puts Dwight up here near the top of this list. But he's not quite at the top, because at number 1, we have, from Survivor 49, Shannon Fairweather. Now, Shannon is somebody who is initially sort of picked up on by certain people on her tribe as potentially being kind of fake, but she does find herself in the majority alliance with Savannah, Rizzo, and Nate. I don't think she finds herself in a particularly poor position on that majority alliance either. I think she finds herself in a good position. The only thing is we have Sage, who really doesn't get a good vibe from Shannon, and that's sort of where Shannon's game eventually falls apart. But I do think that if Uli had ever gone to Tribal Council as an original tribe, Shannon never would have been a real consideration to go home. So that's something that very few people on this list can really say. Nobody else on this list can say that not only were they part of a majority alliance, but they were a key player in a majority alliance that probably wouldn't have turned on them. I guess it's a little bit hard to say when Shannon's alliance was never really tested compared to Say's, who was tested multiple times. But I really don't think that the Uli Four were ever turning against each other at any point. So, and that's the main reason that she ends up above everyone else on this list. Now, she does get swapped into a position where it's just her and Sage from Uli, and they never go to Tribal Council. Then they get swapped again, and now it's just her, Sage, and Jawan. And Sage really has to put in the work to convince Jawan to flip on Shannon, but you know, she kind of gets screwed in a way by the various swaps that happened. And then she also kind of gets screwed by such a late merge, because if she does make the merge, I don't know if she goes home all that early. It's really difficult to say. But she at least has allies in Nate and Rizzo and Savannah.
I mean, I'll go back to your previous point on the had they originally gone to Tribal Council. Who is the most likely person that probably goes out in that first Tribal Council? We have a 50-50 between Jawan or Sage. The two people that are ultimately the deciding factor in Shannon going home. So simply put, them not having lost a challenge ended up actually hurting Shannon in the long run. Had they lost one challenge before getting into multiple swap stages and a late merge, Shannon would still be thriving in the game come the merge time. And it's really weird situation because, again, she's so early recognized as a player who seems, completely spiritual in an almost fake way to certain players, and some people don't seem to get it in the same way she does. Some people aren't here for the, rah happiness, and it's kind of more Shannon's thing that she's like this clearly spiritual person who has this set of beliefs that she goes by, and throughout the game it's this questioning factor for how much they think they can actually trust what's actually going on, but we never get to see that really explored because, again, Sage finds herself in a complete hole against Shannon, and now all of a sudden, after a couple swap situations and time has gone on, she's built herself this ability to flip the ball, and she turns it right onto Shannon. And it's ultimately, I think, a testament to how great Sage played the early stages of the game, like truly well, and like won that battle. But Shannon didn't even necessarily think to turn on Sage either, and actually started to approach her to kind of bridge that gap, realizing that's an opportunity for her. So aside from the lack of social awareness in that round where she goes out, she plays a pretty solid game for someone who ends up going out in 12th place.
And well, this placement wasn't as difficult to rank as the 13th placers. There was definitely some difficulty. There was definitely a lot of debates and questioning in terms of getting our ranking sorted out. It's definitely a little bit more difficult to explain exactly why certain players were ranked at where they were, but I hope we did a sufficient job at explaining it. And if you guys disagree strongly with our rankings, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your guys' opinions. But that being said, I think that's kind of everything there is to say about this group of players.
I don't have anything else really to add, but yeah, just drop your comments down below. Any thoughts and criticisms you have, just let us know, and we will try and get back to you, respond, because, it'd be good to have that kind of conversation and see your guys' opinions down in the comments.
Before we head off, I just wanted to make an announcement because we got our first ever comment from an actual Survivor player on the 16th Placers video. We actually got a comment from Justin himself, and he promised us free pizza. So, Justin, I don't know if you're continuing to watch our content after this, or if you just wanted to see the video where we talked about you, but if you are watching this, I wanted to say thank you so much. You're a legend, you're awesome, huge shout out, and if you ever wanted to be on the podcast, hey, it's an open invitation.
Yeah, it would just be a real treat to have you on. It'd be awesome just to hear what you have to say, maybe about your experience, time on the game, just overall thoughts and opinions, and just have an engaging conversation. It'd be a blast.
That being said, hopeless reaching out to a Survivor alumni over and done with. Not really much else to say, so we hope you enjoyed the video. We hope you enjoy our future videos, and the pod has spoken.